Hi, and a very, very, very good morning or good afternoon, good evening, wherever it is that you happen to be when you're watching this. I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, and author, and I'm delighted to be here for the latest of these Soul Leader Inspiring interviews with Shane DeGaris, who is the group CEO. Now, Shane, I was today, I looked up your full title today. And I'm going to just, unfortunately, I'm a singer as well, so I'm going to breathe. Group Chief Executive at Barts NHS Trust and Barking, Havering and Redbridge University NHS Trust. And am I right? As I understand it, Barts is, and I don't know if combined, is it the second biggest NHS trust in the UK? And the NHS is one of the biggest employers in the world. So we're talking about a lot of people.
Yeah, so Rasheed, thank you for sort of inviting me to come along and to chat through with you. So Barts Health, well, these groups are evolving around the country, but basically Barts Health, by any measure, is a very, very large trust. It's about a 2.1 billion pound turnover organisation, sort of 20,000 plus staff. And then Barking, Havering and Redbridge Hospitals Trust is also actually quite a large trust. It's an 800 million pound turnover, probably another 8,000 staff. So you've kind of, as a collaboration about working together, we'd be one of the biggest groups in the NHS. Probably not the biggest, because as I say, lots of these things, if you look back 10 years, 5 years, 3 years, there are a lot more groupings coming together now as I think the NHS moves much more to collaboration rather than competition.
And wow, incredible. And it's interesting, isn't it? And one of the things I've learned that of those trusts, Barts is one of the, in terms of the Barts hospital site, the Barts hospital site is one of the oldest, is that one of the oldest hospitals in the UK also?
Yeah, one of the oldest hospitals in Europe, actually. I mean, it's quite an interesting year. So we've got 5 hospitals in Barts Health. We've got Mile End Hospital, which is kind of a community hospital. We've got the Royal London Hospital, a major teaching hospital here in Whitechapel, where I am today. Newham Hospital and Whipps Cross are both sort of general hospitals in their respective boroughs, and then we have St Bartholomew's Hospital, which is actually its correct official title is the Royal Hospital of St Bartholomew. Just a little fun fact there for you. Now, the Royal London last year celebrated 280 years as a hospital here on the Whitechapel site, and you probably can see behind me there's a picture of the artist impression of the hospital from that time. But St Bartholomew's has just celebrated its 900th anniversary, along with the church of the Greater Church of St Bartholomew, which sits alongside the same site in Smithfield ever since. So amazing history, really.
So, I mean, the thing that with these Soul Leader interviews, I mean, just to set the scene, these interviews are for people who are on that journey of leadership. Many people might be starting out. Some might even be thinking about, some people might be anywhere along their journey or stepping up into senior leadership. And for these interviews, I like interviewing people who are leaders of all types across different sectors and industries, but all who have one thing in common: they get that people side of stuff. But the question that jumps to my mind, I want to ask you first, when you first became a group CEO there, was there a sense of huge responsibility of being CEO of an organization that has so much history and so much love that people must feel for it, even certain things about those sites? Can you tell me a little bit about what that was like?
Yeah, it's a kind of it's a kind of humbling experience at times. Other times it can be quite annoying. Other times it's really positive, but I'm quite often walking at the various hospitals and chatting to staff or going on visits to see what's happening on the front line, and you kind of bump into people, or you hear someone mentions, oh, by the way, so and so has been doing some sort of research project which is in the top 10 in the world, type of thing. Oh, really? That's happening in our hospitals? This is incredible. So you really feel a sense of I've real pride about being involved in such an endeavour. But it's not just things like that. It's just the NHS is so busy and the staff are so busy, so that you do feel a sense of pride just talking to people doing their day jobs about how hard everyone's working, trying to keep patients safe and do the things that they got into healthcare in the first place for. So no, it's a truly it's a role that requires, I think, quite a bit of humility. I think most leadership roles do. remembering where you came from, how you got there, and kind of why, what's the point to some extent, which it can't be about just doing it for yourself, if that kind of makes sense.
Right. And maybe that remembering where you came from is a good place for us to start. So where did it all begin? And, tell us, where did it all begin? Tell us a little bit about growing up, and tell us a little bit about your early years and what you first aspired to do.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So you'll tell from my accent, hopefully by now. I'm from Australia. I'm from Adelaide in South Australia, and I've been in the UK since 1996. I've been here. I've worked longer in the UK than I did in Australia, but I actually trained as a physiotherapist. So I'm clinically trained, clinically qualified. Worked as a physiotherapist for many years, and kind of got into, I wouldn't say leadership, that came much later. I got into management, managing a team, managing a department, managing a service in physiotherapy and therapies. And I think that's where the connection was then made to being into more general management, and then ultimately into leadership roles. But I mean, I got into physio because I played a lot of basketball, a lot of sports. In fact, I still occasionally play basketball, though not at the same pace as you would do at a younger age. And I had to see physiotherapists a lot. I had a lot of ankle injuries, knee injuries, so I kind of interfaced with physiotherapists, and I did okay at school, and I kind of had choices about what I wanted to do at university, and I ended up deciding to be a physiotherapist. I think because I loved what they did, and I clearly liked working with people. I didn't really know that then, but I liked dealing with people. And so that's how I got into that. And it's interesting, I got into management because I found working with an individual patient one-on-one, which is what I did a lot of. I worked in musculoskeletal, in outpatients, injuries, backs, necks, sports, and that type of stuff. And I had great satisfaction in helping the patient in front of me get better. But of course, I realized that, if I had more of a role in the way the department would run, I could influence the outcomes more than the one patient was in front of me. And it's interesting, that philosophy has kind of stuck with me as I've become more senior. I'm still trying to make a difference to that patient, but on a much bigger scale. But yeah, someone asked me the other day, do I miss being a physio? Because I'm not registered anymore. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't, because I like making the difference on a bigger stage.
There's so many things there that interest me, that background in sport, because I love, as a coach, I love speaking to athletes, and I've been lucky once or twice to, as a life and leadership coach and career coach some people who are athletes, and I love that mentality. I love there's something about that mentality. So I'm curious about that. I know I definitely want to talk about that. Amazing that you're physio, and then through that journey and happenstance of going to the physio, and then developing that interest in physio. Was there interest in, did you at any point want to pursue sports before the stuff around the physio kind of came in, or was that just something that you were good at and enjoyed doing?
Oh, I would have loved to play sport for a living. In Australia, if you weren't playing sport, particularly as a boy, you had to play sport, and I loved it. But it just wasn't good enough, that you play with people that've got, you can just see talent.
Yeah.
Obviously, you need talent and hard work, but
right.
Wasn't good enough or tall enough, I'm afraid.
Yeah. So then that's interesting. That thing about early. So you're doing sport, you're going to the physio, then you realize, actually I'm enjoying this. And you start working as a physio, and then early on realizing, actually I can have more of an impact on people in that next step of management. What's interesting, if we pick up from there, we get many people, isn't it? And it happens a lot in the NHS and no doubt other sectors, where people they go into it because they care about people in these people professions. And so many people watching this will be in people professions, NHS, wherever else. And they care about people, they want to make a difference. But that next step of being a manager becomes daunting. And I've coached people who've sat down in front of me, and my manager thinks I should go into management, but I'm worried about. So let's pick up on that piece. What would you say to somebody? What was your experience of that first bit when you first became a manager? What was that like?
Well, it's quite different. I mean, people look at you differently, obviously, for starters, and they're looking to you for answers. quite often when you haven't got them.
Mm.
So you learn quite quickly, I think, to then work with and through others. And again, I don't think I realize that with a level of sophistication now that I did not have back at that time. I think I was also a bit lucky as well. I had a number of opportunities where people were on like short-term leave for sabbaticals, or a couple of women went on maternity leave, and I was asked if I could cover their management job for a period. So it was kind of good for everybody. They got cover for, you know, the 9 months or a year, and I got an opportunity to act into a role which I knew wasn't mine permanently, and I could step back from. So it kind of felt a bit freer. The advice I always give people is try and seek out opportunities. Try and you know, don't wait for them to fall in your lap. You know, one thing I still say to this day, if I talk to mentees or staff, is that if your managers and your leaders don't know your personal ambitions, they can't help you. Now,
really important.
Even if they do know it, they might not be able to help you, or they might not want to. There's different strategies to handle that. But the starting point is in a very sort of with humility, what are your aspirations and how can we help?
Really important.
Luckily, people did offer me help and guidance, and I had to do a few lateral moves away from physiotherapy into more mainstream hospital management, because actually there's a separate point here about how you then progress in a hospital environment. That's pretty much what I've done through and through, is that for a physiotherapist or a therapist, a non-doctor or a non-nurse, there are less opportunities to progress up the management.
And this is an important point, isn't it? I'm glad that you touched on it, because there's so many things. There are a number of things there that are really interesting to note, isn't it? So for me, there's that thing about, first of all, when you're doing the job, let people know what your aspirations are, because otherwise your manager may not necessarily know. It's not assumed that somebody necessarily wants to progress or might want to necessarily to progress into management. So that's, first of all, an important message. And I guess it works the other way for anyone who's watching this who's already a leader. That thing about finding out from your staff what their aspirations, provide that space for them to do to do that. I like that line where you mentioned then sometimes the next opportunity may not be that linear. So what's your thoughts for the person? I like that. Well, you also made the point about when opportunities come along, take them. Do you feel as though, I'm wondering if there's something about with opportunities, because two people might be in the same room, one person spots an opportunity, another person doesn't. So I want to ask you a little bit about this. I mean, as you look back, are there pointers about how one can spot opportunities? Because some people just know when they come along, don't they? They've got their ear to the ground. They seem to be more aware. They're more alert. Can you speak to that a little bit, Shane?
Yeah, and I think part of this is not any great sixth sense. It's something I absolutely hated doing, and that was networking. One of the first things that a series of mentors and kind of managers said to me was, you've got to get better networks. And I said, well, okay, what does that mean? And so then obviously explaining about, well, connecting laterally with people inside your organization, but also outside, in a sort of curious and inquisitive way, so that you tend to find out more about what's going on. And the more senior I've got, the more I realize, of course, that leaders are looking for good people all the time. So it's quite handy having, a list of people you can think, well, maybe they might be. But of course, that we might cover this separately, of course, but that's also a route down to potential inequalities, which we need to be quite careful about. But, the point is you have to be networked. And the more you can do in that space, the better, really. Yeah,
I think it's really interesting. Tell us, and I'm sure we'll come back to some of those themes. So then came what was the next steps? You're there, there's a couple of these management opportunities. There's some people who've gone off on comments, or they've taken a little bit of a break, some opportunities emerge. But then there comes a point in your career where you move into kind of the operations side. And can you tell us a little bit about that? And I'm curious to know if the operations, the logical, the practical, the fixing bit side precedes the people side, with you, Shane? You know, I'm wanting to know which bit kind of came first, because even with the physiotherapy, there's something about fixing things, right, and or getting things back into their best order.
It's a really great line of questions, you see. So I think so the tipping point for me was I did a couple of these secondments and acting up opportunities, and I had to make, and they're obviously in mainstream operational management roles in a hospital, not in physiotherapy or therapy. So I was the acting head of therapies at one point. So this is completely different. So I'm actually managing outpatients in the hospital, where I'm managing the medical wards with matrons in the hospital, that type of thing. And a job came up, a general management job came up in a different trust. And I had to make a decision that, well, do I go for that? And if I do go for that, I'm literally saying goodbye to my clinical career. Because when you're sort of acting up and you're on secondment, you've got, well, I could always go back, couldn't I? I could always, you know, if I don't really like this or I don't succeed, I can go back to my comfort blanket. So a conscious decision had to be made. I was going to go for this job, and if I got it, I wasn't going to go back. So that was the first thing.
When was that? Can you give us a little bit of I always love a little bit of a timeline. How old were you? What stage were you at? Were you here, or were you in straight? Can you give us can you paint a bit of a picture of that?
Yeah, so I probably came here when I was about 25, 26, and then spent probably 4 or 5 years doing what I've described. And when I was early 30s, got this my first big general management role, a big operational role running medicine and care of the elderly and A&E across 2 different hospitals, with a big team, big budget. You know, that was quite a step for me. And obviously then created a whole series of other opportunities and challenges. Your point about the people is interesting. I think, if I think back to my time in that physiotherapy department, when I thought, well, this place, you know, I could do more for more people. I think what I was actually thinking also was, this isn't very well organized.
Right.
It's not very well structured. The appointment system's chaotic. I mean, so part of I think part of this comes from a will to try and get stuff better organized. And I think maybe implicitly, the people bit that was always there back from when I started, that didn't really come out more until I started doing proper leadership development programs and learning more about yourself and others and your impact. But I suspect it was always there. I just didn't really reference.
And it's interesting because actually, as I hear you speak, I think that it's given me a slight kind of paradigm shift, realizing that very often when we are, as we're going through our careers, we are aware of a number of these things. We're aware of who we are and the people we're serving, and we become aware, we pick up information about the environment around us, isn't it? Oh, is that well organized? Do I think that could be done better, and so on? And it's interesting, we often separate, often through necessity, into departments. There's this, there's that, and there's that. And sometimes that creates these barriers of, we perceive, oh, that person's a numbers person, that person's a people person, that person's a this kind of a person. But maybe the thing that I'm curious about here is that as your career is growing and these opportunities emerging, you're still there at this point, a very young leader. Where did the confidence come from, and where did the competence come from to take on each new thing? Because many people, Shane, don't know, and you probably see it in mentoring, you know, an opportunity comes along and people often really struggle for a long time. I'm not sure if I've got this. I'm curious to know, and sorry to load up a few questions here, so you can pick whichever one you kind of like. But I'm curious to know, what was the innate skill set and what are the skills that you've developed over time? Because I get the feeling that my instinct is here that you, and I mean this as a compliment, that you had that skill as a very skilled generalist who then builds in the specialisms that is required at each stage. I mean, am I along the right track here? I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. What bits is the innate bits that you had, and the bits, oh my gosh, I've got to learn more about that and learn more about that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. So I think take the sporting analogy, you know, so obviously there was some sort of talent there, but I think it was quite generalist. It wasn't, you know, so good at lots of things, but not excelling at anything, interestingly. So quite well-rounded was kind of, and that was the feedback through my school and high school stuff as well. And I think that's probably the backbone for been able to be organised and to do a good job. I had good management, I had good line managers that was they set clear, stuff we take for granted that gloss over. They set clear objectives, clear expectations. You could go to them for help. You could be clear what you were trying to achieve. I think that coupled with starting to, and with their support and their financial support, getting onto some sort of paid proper leadership programs at various levels, culminating in, eventually doing a master's. And then that, I think, with coaching, mentoring, so quite a rounded package of support. So, I mean, I had good support. I mean, I don't think I would have developed the way I have without that, that support from the leadership team around me.
And where did the aspiration? Yeah, and I'm curious to know where where did the aspiration bit come from? Was there quite early on that, okay, I can go here, I can achieve that? Or was it at each step you realized you could do more? Or was it other people saying, Shane, you could do this, you could be a leader, you could do that? Where did that bit of the aspiration come from?
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? And I ask these questions all the time with my people, so you say, well, where do you want to be in 10 years' time? And, that's a really tough question to answer, isn't it? That's a really tough question.
Yeah.
And if you're in general management, 3 or 4 layers below the top, the obvious answer is, well, I'd like to be the chief executive one day, isn't it? And it's a safe answer because, well, that's good. That's ambitious. He's got high ambition. It's a path that's kind of, possible with the right sort of support and development, but it's also far off enough that it's kind of, well, kicks it out that way a little bit. So I probably said that, and I may not have actually even meant that. Thinking more about the next role. So what I say to people now is, it's good if you can be clear about where you want to get to.
Yeah.
You should always try and think 2 jobs ahead, not 1, because what we're really trying to work out is the next job a no regret move to where I'm trying to get to. And even if I'm not clear what I'm trying to get to, that's fine. But what you don't want to do is go on some sort of tangential thing where you then look back in 3 years' time and thought, oh, I'm no better off than what I was 3 years ago on my ultimate goal. Now I'm clearer. So I quite often try to push those. So I tended to do, and again, I don't think I knew this at the time. I tended to go for these no regret roles, which were kind of bigger operational roles, thinking, well, if I do want to be a chief exec or have the option, there's not going to be any regret having a broad experience in the operational running of a hospital. So I went from medicine to A&E to surgery, diagnostics. I went around to all the sort of big areas. Right. So I had quite, again, a rounded portfolio of.
This is what powerful. What you're saying here is really, really powerful. And I think it's really important lessons for that leader. I love that thing that you're saying about thinking that three steps ahead, that 3 roles ahead. So what I'm hearing from you, and I want to kind of check in, is that with the no regret roles, is it because you had a sense of that 3 roles ahead, even though that next step that I might have taken here might appear to be lateral or sideways or not quite there, you're strategically aware it's giving you this lot of skills so that you can then move here. It's a bit like on some of those board games where, it's not quite linear that way, but you're going, were you always conscious of that? And where did that come? Because not every leader's got that. Not everybody's got that understanding and thinking a few steps ahead and have that level of strategic thinking about themselves in their career.
Well, so a lot of that. So I think I got better at that as I got older. A lot of that came from good line management support, good advice, mentoring, coaching, and the dreaded word I hated when I started, from networking. Because of course, the more I got networked, and I was told that 10 years previously, the more you were networked, the more you talk to people, the more you explore the possibilities. And also just always thinking about these roles, again, I say the same thing to people I talk to now, is that, this is a mutual, this is a mutual role, i.e. there's going to be something in it for you and something in it for me as the employer. So what you really want is a win-win, where this is good for me to do a good job that I think I can add value and I can make a difference for whatever it is I want to do for patients in my case, or whatever it is. And it helps me get to my next role at whenever. And for the employer, they get someone that's dedicated, loyal, wants to learn, wants to develop, has got the right values. So, I'm always looking for things that are complementary. Because
It's
there's so
so
many possibilities, it should be able to be complementary.
it's so extraordinary. And it's interesting you're talking about the physiotherapy. I'm always thinking, and I've never done any of that kind of stuff, but I'm always thinking about the body and how everything's kind of lined up. Because as I speak to you, there's a real roundedness around leadership. And you clearly from early on, you knew about that link for you between the working with the person who's in front of you and improving the service and so on. But for many people, we see it in many people's experience of leadership, and when they've been led, is quite the opposite, where it's being toxic, it's being challenging, it's all over the place, across sectors. So I'd love to know a little bit, Shane, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how is it that we can develop more rounded, heart-centered leaders who really understand this, because it would seem as though, isn't it, we often get the people who are really good at management, the people who are good people, but sometimes you don't get the people enough, the people into the leadership, or they may not have some of those other. I'd love to know your thoughts on what are some of the things that we need to do to develop more rounded leaders, because not everyone has got the experience where you're a CEO and you'll go around, you'll visit the particular places, you've got time to people, you're still hands-on in terms of mentoring people. I can almost hear people watching things like that thinking, oh my God, I wish that was my CEO. I wish that was my boss. I mean, do you get that feedback? First of all, do you get that feedback quite a lot? Because do you see that in yourself? Because not everyone has that kind of manager who gets that. Many people don't get that.
Yeah, well, I've been here. So I've been group chief exec of Barts for about 18 months, and I was the deputy chief exec to a fantastic leader, Dame Alan Williams, for 4 years before that. Before that, I spent 6 years as the CEO of a smaller hospital trust. So I've kind of had that smaller hospital experience, and then here's the number 2 in a really big trust to learn about groups and to work with Dame Alan. And so we do get this feedback, but she really instilled a values-based culture, which I'm really, I'm so attracted to. In fact, you can't see on camera, but right behind me is our trust values are on the wall here. And I have them over my line of sight here, so I can see them all the time because they're a good anchoring about kind of what we're trying to do for patients and for staff. What we really want is a great place to work and a great place to have care. So a lot of this for me is about, and we don't always get it right, Rasheed. We've met in other circumstances, and the key is to say, well, where don't we get it right? Why is that? What can we learn? So we want to be a learning organization. We want to be a values-based organization. So for me, the values of the leader, and we've all worked for people that we don't quite click with in terms of values, and to some extent, that's okay, but it's not really in the broader picture. Because if you're going to really go to town and support that person, and you want to have an alignment across a top team in particular. So I'm very much a values-based leader. But that's come from, I think, from inherent values I probably had personally that have then been exposed, if you like, as part of leadership development, leadership training, and working in places where it can be a good place to work if we all focus together.
Oh, I like that. And it makes me then wonder, do you think that when we are looking at, and this is in broad terms, and maybe we're talking, very, very broadly, but it's that values base made me really think about how is it that we really recruit and develop people. Often in the past, going back to that day when you talked about being the manager, we start off often in management and then we learn about leadership and so on. Do you think that when you look out at the world, do you think that we get that right in hiring rounded leaders, or that we get the people who've done the stuff and that they probably can manage well? I know it's a very broad question, but do you have a sense of that? Because I look around I watch a lot of stuff around leadership, and I look at leadership across different sectors, and lots of the time I'm thinking, really? So do you have any observations on that? Because I wonder if there are some fundamentals that to really be a leader, it has to be either innately there, or one's got to really learn it and recognize that it is essential. We're there to serve. So so it's great. So as you said, someone like Owen, that values base was in there, and I love her story, by the way. I think that she started off as a porter. I think I heard her say that started off a porter, and then and that humility. So do you feel as though do you feel as though we get that right when we're looking at our leadership pool generally, and when you look out at at organizations generally as a CEO, and you look around the world around you?
I think we don't always get it right, and I think it's a tricky balance, isn't it? Because and you can't be driven by extremes either. So it's no good having a values-based person if they're not competent and they can't do the job. Equally, you don't want some robotic, completely tick, 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 tick person that's got no kind of interpersonal skills or ability to work with others. And it's obviously different in different industries, but in healthcare, you have to be able to work with and through others. And most of what my team do and I do, obviously I'm the group CEO, I'm the accountable officer, I've obviously got hierarchical control, which I don't really want or try to use unless I really have to. Because as you well know, if you have to really do that, you've kind of lost a bit about what we're trying to do. So most of what my team has to do is work on a matrix system, quite a sophisticated matrix, where they're trying to get the best out of others they don't line manage, quite senior people. So that requires a way of working which lends it to values-based leadership and that style. But I don't think we do get this right all the time. And probably the best way to look at that is, well, how many people leave any employer, including our trust, within a year of being here, and why is that? And it's a lot more than we would like.
Yeah,
we're always trying to recruit new staff, but the effort to retain the ones we've got, it should be just as much.
Yeah, and I think what getting from you that I think is really wonderful here is that I'm seeing that real link in. It's lovely, really seeing that link. Speaking to a CEO and realizing that if we get right that hopefully somebody does a job that they first of all enjoy, and that they're supported and that they're encouraged, that line carries on all the way up throughout their potential career. And I genuinely believe that when people join an organization, when they're supported and mentored formally and informally and all the rest of it, very often, why is that person going to want to leave? Because their experience has been just so good. They want to carry on growing. They want to continue developing. I want to ask something a little bit left field. And you touched on it a little bit. It's not left field, but it's there. How do you then lead leaders? So you're a group CEO. How do you lead other people who are leaders? And in a way, is it easier or is it more difficult? But how do you then lead other people who are leaders, right? So everyone's important, but how do you? It makes me think about as a singer and performer back in my old singing days that when everybody's kind of in that realm, I've got to be careful what I say, but where everyone's got an ego or everyone's important, and how do you manage all of that?
Well, starters, you want to make sure you've got the right values-based leaders around you. So half this conversation isn't difficult. But you have at this level in a group our size. I mean, I've got 4 hospital CEOs. They've got their own executive teams in each hospital. My lenders run together in North London, but basically it's 4 leadership teams in the Barts health hospitals. I think got a series of group directors, and that team together is the group executive we run as the trust. And these are very senior people, as you've alluded to. So you can't micromanage, or you wouldn't want to micromanage that level of senior people. What you want to do is set the width of the road about what we're trying to do across the domains around, in this case, in hospital case, hospital performance, hospital quality and safety, and financial performance, along with things we're trying to do with the group around inclusion, equity, strategy, and then let them get on with it. And we're not their regulator. We're a poorly performing hospital or a problem of the hospital is as much my problem as it is the CEOs of the hospital. So how can we, kind of what are they doing about it? What help do they need from the centre, and how can we exercise and work together? So it's very much operating in a strategic space, but also a supportive one. And it's hard to get that balance right sometimes because of the scale. And I think you'll see groups, particularly in there's evidence about this in the kind of private world, but in the NHS, as groups come together, this tension between kind of group and, in this case, hospital, is quite important, and try and get that balance right. And we don't always get it right, but we try. Knowing it's there as an issue, as one thing we constantly talk about, is probably quite helpful.
How much do you, as a leader, how much do you keep your eye on what's going on immediately in front of you, and how much do you need to be thinking about what's coming down the road? Oh, I think you've just gone on mute by mistake.
Yeah, probably just muted myself at a key moment. Great question, Richard. And there's probably two ways to answer it: is what should I be doing, and what am I doing?
I like that. I like that a lot. I like that a lot.
So clearly, and then obviously, you know where this question, the answer is going to go. So I should be spending a lot of time, half the time maybe looking internally at what's happening at a high level, and then the rest of the time, external stakeholders, external world, strategy, where are we trying to get to on the big picture items? I say, I mentioned inclusion, equity, benefits we're doing, long-term planning, future of the hospitals, population health, inequalities, that sort of space. The reality is, and I won't be the only NHS chief exec that says this, is that it's such a political operating environment with relatively short cycles based around elections, that the focus is very much, and I can understand this as a kind of a taxpayer myself, is around money, is around key performance standards. So, how long do you wait if you come to A&E? How long do you wait if you're in an ambulance trying to get there and be offloaded? How long does it take to get my cancer diagnosis and treatment? How long does it take to get elective surgery? And as a member of the community and as a user of health services from myself and my family, those things are important to me. So there's quite a lot of focus nationally and politically on a small number of very important targets that make a difference to patients. So I do tend to spend a lot more time on that stuff, because that's a lot of what we get asked about externally. What I'm more interested in, of course, is, I've got hospitals across East London. At least 3 of those 8 boroughs are probably in the top 10 most deprived for various dimensions nationally. As I think I said before, people so technically eligible for levelling up funding that might be moving out of London, but actually there's deprivation right here and variation. But the only way to tackle some of that is to really look over the longer term with our partners in the integrated care system, and that requires bandwidth, time to think, time to work together. So we're trying to do both. The honest answer is we spend a lot more time in the short-term space than the longer term.
I think most leaders who I've ever met, coached, or worked with will say that. Tell me, let's talk a little bit about advice that you would give to those kind of budding leaders, and it might be good to touch on some of the things around the inequalities and seeing rounded leaders, from all backgrounds and so on. But for anybody, any type of leader who's watching this, and I remember many years ago, funny enough, and it was at Barts, I remember once many years ago, I was running a course and there was a lady there, and she said that her aspiration was, again, she wasn't born in the UK, she'd come to the UK. She said that her aspiration was to be a CEO one day, and she dressed like a, which I loved, and I often tell that story. But for the person who has got those big dreams, let's start off with them. What advice would you give to somebody? Because sometimes those big dreams are knocked out of us. I think that particularly, I think that there's a thing perhaps culturally, particularly here in the UK, maybe not just, but, if somebody says, I want to be a CEO, it might be, so some people might not even dare to say that. So what would be your first advice to somebody who perhaps wants to lead in terms of their aspirations and to help them just to get things going? Let's say to that budding person who wants to lead, maybe like the young Shane early on in their career, maybe that first management bit, they're about to step into that. What advice would you give generally to them?
I think, think big, have ambitions and talk about them, but in a way that doesn't, come across as arrogant and it's all about me. So why would be the question. So why do you want to be a CEO? Great, you want to be a CEO. Really, that's really impressive. But why is that? For me, I could talk through that narrative around individual patients and making a difference and you know, and that wasn't a made up story, that was actually true. And because it was authentic, makes it far easier to talk about, because if you then questioned about it, because it's coming from your heart, it's authentic, I can talk about that. And you know, whereas if you've kind of made up a story, it gets picked away pretty quickly, and particularly the more senior you get. So I think one thing is about kind of being clear, that's great, but why? You've also got to be realistic, I think. So, you know, if I'd said, well, I want to be a Premier League footballer, that's my ambition. I was like, well, yeah, I'm not sure you're good enough. Now, the good thing about leadership, of course, is it's not quite like that. You know, if you've got talent and you've got the right attitude, you've got the right value set, I think you can go far in all industries, actually. But you've got to get the right advice, the right support. And as I say, I always, you know, I wish if I look back where I was before, I'm going to say I got a combination of luck and opportunity and networking, but networking was the key.
Yeah.
That was the best advice I had, because I was connected with different people. My name came up, and if I hadn't made those connections, I don't think that would have happened. It would have had to be complete luck.
Yeah.
And you can't rely on luck completely.
Right. And let's maybe pick up on that, because I think for me also, you know, as a coach, when I'm coaching anybody, whether I'm coaching people in business, whether I'm coaching people in leadership, I talk to them about the importance of networking, not least because it's just important to have those people skills, build those relationships, and to know it, and to know people, and to understand, because some people also, they're very good at socializing, but they're not good at networking, and they're different, right? How does one, what's your take on that line between, not even that line between networking effectively, which for everybody's benefit, and the danger in avoiding nepotism? And I mean that also if you're giving advice to people who you're leading, to make sure that they're aware of also the people who aren't in the room. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it can be a tricky one, isn't it, to navigate. Some people have got it naturally because they are people, and they are the curiosity that you talk about is there. So it is about the curiosity, and they're key, and it's values led. So it's about helping them and other people grow, and they're not doing it selfishly or what have you. What's your take on how one can balance that balancing act?
It's really tricky. It's really tricky. So again, that sort of pillar of authenticity, you've got to have kind of why you're doing this and what it is. The other thing I remember I saw somewhere, I think it was someone very famous talked about this. I think it might have been Barack Obama, but it was something about advice to young leaders, basically, or anyone, was basically, you know, be the one that's helpful. So, you know, I'll take care of that. Let me pick that up for you. Let me have a look at that for you, type of stuff, because leaders are really busy and they got stuff going. And they love people that speak up and say, well, I'll take care of that, I'll help that. I think I must have seen a TED talk or something on that. And I thought at the time, that's really interesting. A really simple message, combining with kind of networking and connecting, be helpful. You just get noticed. And if you're good, of course, and you get stuff done, these things tend to circle around. So you start to get some momentum. And, you know, you're not being arrogant about it. You're, you know, leaders love people that go beyond, above and beyond, and do this sort of stuff. I wouldn't overthink it. And maybe to be fair to you, as you said, that some people get this more naturally than others, and others may have to work at it more of a, in a kind of tactical way, but still authentic. That's my key message, I think.
No, I would agree with that. And then how for you? Let's just say a little bit about so just before we wrap up and close. So how do you balance? I mean, I should really talk about this for the bit. How do you balance? You know, a lot of the responsibility and all of that pressure and so on with life balance. And I'll tell you a true story, which will make you laugh. So last night, for some reason, I had a dream about this interview. We were doing the interview on site, and then the room became full of people, and so it was too noisy to do the interview. So that was really interesting. So the thing is, for me, I'm curious about how do you manage that busyness, the weight of that, and having that life back, because it can be challenging for any leader. It can be particularly challenging in the environment such as you, where the most challenging environment for anybody who's in an organization like the NHS, and of course there are many others who are similarly have got different types of challenges. But how do you balance that, and how do you keep your calm veneer at least?
Yeah, it's a great question. I get asked this one a lot. So one of the best pieces of advice, and I've had many from great people, great mentors over the years, two pieces of advice stand out. So One is a former chief exec, big trust, huge trust in the NHS, really busy, good person. He said to me, simple message is, if you're the CEO, and this applies anywhere, I think, in any industry, make sure you are only doing the things that only you can do. Right? And you sort of say that out loud and you think, oh, okay. But if you try and apply that to your working life, it makes a huge difference. It really does. So that's probably the first thing I'd say. The second thing is a bit more rounded in terms of the well-being stuff. So another mentor, a great and the good type person that's just now retired, actually, his advice to me when I was first appointed back in the old days, chief exec, he said to me 3 things. He said, right, just make sure you do 3 things. He said, first thing, make sure you always put patients first. I thought that's a great mantra to live by, of course. Secondly, make sure you hold your nerve when you get challenged about something you think has been done and is right. And he said the third thing, I was expecting, right, what's this third bit of management leadership advice? He said, the third thing is make sure you stay healthy. And I looked at it and thought, wow, that wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting some other, and do this with whatever management technique, leadership technique. And I said, just unpack that a bit for me. He said, these jobs, if you want to work 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, you'll find no problem filling up that time with stuff to do. The art is not to do that and try and balance and compartmentalize what you're doing. So a few techniques. So one is that, so the first thing about doing the only things you can do. Second is obviously having a great team and trying to delegate by default and not doing everything yourself. And thirdly, simple things like, I took up cycling during the pandemic because obviously people were trying to do things differently, and I've kept it up because it's just, one, it keeps me a bit fitter, and two, because cycling around London is not exactly the safest thing you can do. You kind of have to concentrate on the road, etc., etc. And it tends to take your mind off the day.
Good.
Interestingly, so I tend to get outside of work. I managed to manage it. But yeah, that's some advice I had.
That's really, really good. And maybe just last question, picking up on this thing about, I just want to talk about diversity. How is it that you think we can get to a point where we've got more people who are diverse? And I mean, in every sense, gender, color, race, thinking styles, learning. What do you think is the secret to that? To me, I think I think a large portion of this is going to be down to that, really, the stuff that you've touched on, taking an interest in people, including the people who you may not normally be taking an interest in, and everybody who's in the room, everybody you're employing. But any thoughts or tips around that?
Yeah, this is a huge area for us, as you know, and we've made some good progress over the last few years, particularly on proportion of kind of ethnic minority colleagues in more senior roles. But that's great, going from kind of 30% to 42 or 45. That's great, but it doesn't reflect our local population. It's a huge way to go. And and as staff has often said to me that, Shane, I really appreciate all you're doing, and we know you're taking it seriously, but the simple measure I've got is until I look up at the top team and see more faces that reflect mine, I'm going to think we're not doing enough. So we've got a whole program of stuff, as I'm sure lots of colleagues listening to this would have, but several things come to mind. The first thing, it's got to be visibly seen as a really important priority for the organization. So we've got it on our, all of our key documentation right at the top, right next to patient care and quality money. So it's not some sort of subordinate side effort. So you've got to mainstream it, I think. And the second part of mainstreaming is that the metrics that we use to monitor this stuff, beyond the sort of soft intelligence we get from our networks, those metrics have also got to be mainstreamed alongside the ambulance waiting times I talked about before, and A&E and everything else. Because if it's not, and it's just marginalised on the side, it's a secondary concern. Right. And our staff tell us that in order to have a great place to work, we've got to address these issues. So I think it just needs to be really mainstreamed, taken seriously, and with, again, humility and listening to what people are saying and acting on that feedback.
Powerful. And 3 last tips for anyone listening to this, wherever stage they are in their leadership journey. You've given us loads and loads from your mentors, loads that you've learned throughout, but your 3 essentials for anyone who's listening, especially those people who are wanting to be heart-centered, right? Or,
Well, if you're from the healthcare world, that you can't go wrong with that original mantra about putting your patients first in your thinking. Everything that comes across my desk, no matter what it is, whatever the issue is, first thing I think, is this an issue for patients? Is it going to make a difference for patients? And a mantra like that is quite helpful. The second is, no matter what industry you work in, you've got to value, develop and support your staff. Your staff, your workforce are the lifeblood of your company. In my case, my hospitals. They are who customers, patients, the community interact with. They are the face of your operation. So you've got to value, support and develop your staff. And I think, you know, I guess lastly, and maybe this is more of a one for us, is that in sort of the healthcare world currently, is that, you know, collaboration is the way to go here. There are vast assets being spent on healthcare and social care in the NHS. It's too compartmentalized. The more we can collaborate with those resources together, the more difference we can make, the kind of taxpayer value, but also more importantly, for patient access and patient care and patient experience. So I hope that's been helpful.
No, that's so brilliant. I mean, Shane, I can't thank you enough. Please can I say from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for spending so much time today here. And I really hope it inspires so many people on their leadership journey. And let's hope that some people come to us saying at some point, I was watching that and I became a CEO because I was inspired when I was listening to Shane DeGaris talking about his own leadership journey. So thank you so much. It's been such a joy speaking to you.
Great. Thank you, Rasheed. And good luck out there.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, absolutely.